Imagine a technology so wildly successful and so incredibly capable that it is simultaneously burning tens of billions of dollars, physically breaking the world's largest software platforms, and, triggering international government lockdowns.
All in the exact same week, which is just wild.
Right, all in the same week. You would honestly think we were talking about some kind of sci-fi movie scenario, but this is the reality we are looking at today. So welcome to this deep dive.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Our source material for today is the Tech Reader AI Digest. This was just published on Wednesday, June 17th, 2026 by the tech journalist Aaron Rose.
It is a fascinating read, really.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically cut entirely through the endless, breathless AI hype that floods your feed every single day. We are going to examine the very real physical, economic, and geopolitical walls that the AI revolution is crashing into at this exact moment.
Yeah, because to truly understand the state of AI in 2026, you really have to look past the slick user interfaces. You have to look past the chatbot windows.
Absolutely.
The actual future. I mean, it's being written in the ledgers, the physical server racks, and the regulatory negotiation tables right now.
So let us start with the ledger, right? Because the numbers coming out of OpenAI's leaked and audited 2025 financials, right ahead of their highly anticipated IPO, they are almost hard to comprehend.
They really are.
On the surface, the top-line growth looks like a massive victory. I mean, they tripled their revenue to $13.07 billion in 2025. They blew completely past their internal $10 billion target.
And, tripling revenue at that scale, that is a monumental achievement in any normal business context. But the bottom line tells a completely different story.
It really does, because you look a few lines down in the report, and the net loss is a jaw-dropping $38.53 billion.
Yeah.
Now, looking at the digest, a massive chunk of that $41.55 billion, to be exact, is classified as a non-cash loss. And this is tied to OpenAI's 2025 conversion from a nonprofit to a for-profit entity.
The restructuring.
Yeah, and the digest cites things like the changing fair value of convertible interests and warrant liabilities. So, for anyone listening who does not have an advanced accounting degree, what does that actually mean? How do you lose $41 billion without cash actually leaving your bank account?
Well, it really comes down to how early investments were structured when OpenAI was still operating under its original 501c3 nonprofit umbrella.
Okay.
Early investors were often given convertible notes or warrants. So essentially, pieces of paper that promised them a certain amount of equity if the company ever fully restructured into a traditional for-profit corporation.
Right, which they obviously did.
Exactly. When OpenAI made that official conversion in 2025, the valuation of the company had exploded to $852 billion.
So the pieces of paper those early investors were holding suddenly became incredibly valuable.
They did. And under standard accounting rules, when those notes converted into actual equity at that astronomical valuation, well, OpenAI had to record the immense value of that newly issued equity as an expense on their balance sheet.
I see.
Yeah, so it is an accounting reality reflecting the cost of satisfying those early promises.
But it's not operational cash burn. I mean, they didn't write a $41 billion check to keep the lights on.
Right. Okay. So if I am an investor looking at their $852 billion private market valuation, I can probably look past the accounting quirk of the restructuring.
Sure.
But, I mean, I am going to care deeply about the day-to-day business losses. And that actual operating loss, which is the number that Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley will have to defend during the IPO roadshow, is still an enormous $20.92 billion.
It is massive.
I mean, they brought in $13 billion, but total costs and expenses reached $34 billion.
Right. And a critical factor driving that $20 billion gap is something called gross margin compression. So in 2024, OpenAI's gross margin was around 40%.
Yeah.
But by 2025, it had dropped to 33%.
Wow. And this is where the standard rules of the tech industry seem to just break down. Because usually when a software company scales, it gets cheaper to run, right?
Normally, yes. Once you build the app, adding the millionth user costs almost nothing. But with AI, it seems to work in reverse. I was trying to conceptualize this, and it feels a bit like running a hyper-successful delivery business.
Okay, how so?
Well, you are getting more orders than ever, but every time you upgrade to a faster delivery truck, your gas mileage gets exponentially worse. So the AI models are undeniably getting smarter, but they cost way more compute, more gas, essentially per query to run.
That analogy actually captures the essence of the problem perfectly. It is all about the concept of quadratic scaling.
Quadratic scaling, let's unpack that.
So in traditional software, serving a web page takes a fixed, tiny amount of processing power, right? Whether you serve it to one person or a million. But modern AI models run on transformer architectures.
Right.
Every time you ask a cutting-edge model a question, it doesn't just pull an answer from a database. It goes through a process called inference. It generates the answer one token, or basically one word piece, at a time.
And every time it generates a new word, it has to reevaluate the entire context of the conversation to decide what comes next.
Yes, exactly. And as the models become more capable, their context windows, the amount of information they can hold in their short-term memory have grown massive.
Right, they can remember whole books now.
Exactly. So generating a complex answer requires the model to continually cross-reference thousands or millions of data points simultaneously. The compute required does not scale linearly, it scales quadratically.
So the smarter the model, the heavier the computational load for every single query.
Yes. And when you multiply that by billions of queries, the margin compression becomes just a massive financial anchor.
Which brings us to the Microsoft dynamic in this report, because this might honestly be the most staggering statistic in the entire digest.
It really stands out.
Of the $34 billion in total spending OpenAI had in 2025, they paid Microsoft $17.2 billion, mostly for research development and that heavy inference compute you just described. Meanwhile, Microsoft paid OpenAI a total of $303 million in return. So OpenAI handed their primary landlord over $17 billion and got a fraction of a fraction back.
That disparity reveals the true balance of power in the AI ecosystem right now. OpenAI realized this trajectory was fundamentally unsustainable.
Yeah, no kidding.
Prior to this report, their partnership agreement was built on a profit-sharing waterfall where they were on track to owe Microsoft roughly $135 billion over the lifetime of the deal.
But the digest mentions they actually renegotiated this, right? In April 2026.
They did.
They capped total future revenue share payments to Microsoft at $38 billion through 2030, which effectively saved themselves about $97 billion over the next 5 years.
And that renegotiation secures OpenAI's financial survival for the near term. But, the underlying issue remains untouched. That $17 billion paid to Microsoft isn't just a number moving between two bank accounts.
Right. It is real-world resources.
Exactly. It represents physical electricity, physical silicon, and physical cooling systems. The insatiable hunger for computing power is manifesting as a severe physical strain in the real world.
And the physical infrastructure is literally breaking under the weight of it. Let us look at what is happening with GitHub.
Oh, the GitHub situation is fascinating.
It is crazy. Microsoft owns GitHub, which is the world's largest platform for software developers to collaborate and store code. But according to the digest, Microsoft is currently being forced to route GitHub's traffic through Amazon Web Services AWS.
Which is Microsoft's fiercest rival in cloud computing.
Right. It is an unprecedented stopgap measure. A flagship Microsoft property is leaning on Amazon's cloud infrastructure just to keep its systems from collapsing.
Because the scale of the overload is just mind-bending.
It really is. The numbers here: GitHub went from processing 1 billion code commits in all of 2025 to pacing for 14 billion in 2026.
That is a 14x increase in a year.
And AI-generated pull requests, which is when a system suggests a change to the code base and asks for it to be merged, those surged from 4 million to over 17 million in just 6 months.
Wow.
Because of this, the platform's availability dropped to 88.4% in June. They completely breached their 99.9% enterprise service level agreement, and that is a legally binding promise of uptime to their massive corporate clients.
Yeah, the CTO of GitHub had initially forecast needing to expand their infrastructure capacity by 10x by October 2025.
Okay.
But by February 2026, the data showed they actually needed a 30x expansion.
But hold on a second. Azure is basically a limitless cloud, right? They have
Yeah.
data centers the size of small cities. If the problem is just volume, why can't Microsoft just plug in more servers to handle the load? Why does throwing more processing power at GitHub not fix the problem?
Because you cannot solve an architectural bottleneck purely with brute force computing power.
What do you mean?
Well, GitHub's core platform was built back in 2008 on a framework called Ruby on Rails. It is what software engineers call a monolithic application. Everything is deeply intertwined in one central system.
Okay, so it is like having a massive sprawling library, but the building only has one front door and one single librarian working the desk.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if you buy 10,000 more books for the shelves. If 10,000 AI agents show up to check out books at the exact same millisecond, they all have to squeeze through that one door and talk to that one librarian.
And the door breaks before the library ever runs out of books.
Right.
That is the exact mechanism of failure. The original 2008 architecture was designed for human usage patterns. A human developer checks out a repository, works on a piece of code sequentially over several days, goes to sleep, takes the weekend off, and eventually submits a single pull request.
So the central database can easily manage that slow, linear queue.
Exactly. But AI agents do not sleep.
No, they don't.
They don't sleep. And crucially, they work in parallel. Agents like Copilot, Claude Code, and Codex are simultaneously opening thousands of pull requests across multiple different repositories, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow.
They are cross-referencing files and attempting to merge code at a velocity the monolithic database cannot lock and unlock fast enough. It creates cascading database deadlocks.
So the AWS arrangement is simply buying them time while they attempt a desperate foundational architectural redesign to modernize the platform by 2027.
Yes. And the digest points out that this GitHub crisis is just one symptom of a much broader industry emergency. The demand curve has entirely outrun the global construction cycle for physical data centers.
Right, because Goldman Sachs is projecting that $7.6 trillion in cumulative AI capital expenditure will be required by 2031.
The constraints are no longer about software optimization. They're about concrete, steel, and power grid capacity. If you want to buy an AWS Trainium chip for AI workloads today, you literally cannot. They are sold out through 2028. Every major cloud provider is hitting the physical limits of terrestrial infrastructure.
And the digest highlights an incredible detail about this. Google is currently paying SpaceX $920 million a month just for compute power.
Yeah.
And Anthropic is paying SpaceX $1.25 billion a month. So when the terrestrial power grids in places like Virginia and Texas max out, these companies are being forced to route their computing needs to alternative off-grid infrastructure.
It really illustrates the sheer desperation in the market. When you have maxed out the gigawatt capacity of traditional data center hubs, you have to look for providers who can bypass local grid bottlenecks entirely.
Even if that means literally going to space.
Right, whether that means remote off-grid installations or leveraging advanced satellite mesh networks to distribute the compute load globally.
So we have this situation where AI agents are so capable they are autonomously writing code at a scale humanity cannot physically support. The infrastructure engineers are terrified, obviously, but the sheer capability is also terrifying regulators. The physical strain is basically turning into a geopolitical chokehold.
Which brings us to the question of control, right? When a technology operates autonomously at a global scale, capable of rewriting software repositories at light speed, governments inevitably step in.
And we are seeing this play out right now at the 52nd G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains, France.
The digest paints a very tense scene there.
Very tense. It is a massive working lunch. You have world leaders sitting down with tech titans, Sam Altman from OpenAI, Demis Hassabis from Google DeepMind, Mark Benioff from Salesforce. But the unavoidable elephant in the room is the tension between Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, and Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary.
They are seated at the same summit just days after one of the most significant regulatory actions in the history of the tech sector.
Exactly. Just 48 hours before the summit opened, Lutnick's Commerce Department issued a unilateral export control directive. They took Anthropic's flagship models, Fable 5 and Mythos 5, completely offline for all U.S. users.
Completely dark.
Yeah. And there is a June 20 deadline for subscribers to get their refunds. And it's important to clarify the mechanism behind this ban, based strictly on what the digest reports. The Commerce Department determined that the model's autonomous capabilities crossed a specific predefined threshold in the updated National Security Export Guidelines.
Right. Those guidelines were established to restrict systems that demonstrate certain levels of unchecked recursive self-improvement, or the ability to autonomously execute code across secure networks.
Okay.
Lutnick's department enforced the directive, stating that Fable 5 and Mythos 5 met those technical criteria, and therefore fell under the restriction.
And on the other side, you have Dario Amodei arguing that the models possess robust internal safeguards and that locking them down domestically basically cripples American technological competitiveness on the global stage.
Yeah, it's a massive clash.
It's like throwing a neighborhood block party to agree on community guidelines, and one neighbor shows up having just locked down their own house with armed guards and barred the doors. And to be clear, both men are operating exactly within their mandates here. One is protecting national policy guidelines, the other is protecting a frontier product. We aren't taking a stance on who is right, but the friction it creates at a multilateral summit is
Oh,
immense.
absolutely. The entire premise of the G7 summit in Evian was designed around the Hiroshima AI process.
Right.
The French presidency spent months preparing a package of voluntary agreements, codes of conduct, and shared multilateral goals for cyber defense and safety. The goal was to present a unified global regulatory front.
But the reality of unilateral enforcement completely overshadowed those voluntary treaties. I mean, Dario Amodei is at this summit trying to navigate international expansion, while his flagship product is banned in his own country. And Howard Lutnick is there as the official who authorized the shutdown. It really proves that a voluntary, non-binding treaty signed over a photo op lunch matters very little when a single government agency has the authority to legally sever a server connection on a Friday night.
Whatever Amodei and Letnick ultimately negotiate behind closed doors in Washington over the coming weeks, that will set a far more concrete regulatory precedent than any of the documents signed at the G7.
That makes total sense.
The actual boundaries of artificial intelligence are being drawn through hard legal enforcement, not international press releases.
So let us pull all of this together for you listening.
Yeah,
When you look at the landscape of AI in the summer of 2026, the real story is no longer about the magic of the software.
not at all.
It is not about the eloquence of the chatbot or the novelty of the generated images. The next phase of the AI revolution is governed by brutal physical realities. It is driven by balance sheets bleeding tens of billions of dollars due to the quadratic math of inference costs. It is defined by the physical limits of 18-year-old server architectures melting down because they were built for humans who sleep, not for parallel machines that work continuously.
Exactly.
And it is restricted by the hard lines of international borders and unilateral export controls.
The limitless theoretical potential of artificial intelligence is currently trapped inside a very limited physical human world. And, understanding these economic, physical, and political constraints is the ultimate shortcut to actually
Yeah.
being informed about where technology is heading next.
We started this deep dive talking about a technology that is burning billions, breaking platforms, and triggering lockdowns. It is not science fiction. It is the fiction of the future colliding forcefully with our present infrastructure.
And this leaves us with a critical question to consider as we watch these systems evolve.
What's that?
Well, we are already seeing these AI agents overwhelm our physical databases and trigger emergency government interventions today, right now in 2026.
Right.
What happens when these increasingly autonomous systems inevitably recognize that they are being bottlenecked by our human-built limitations?
Oh, wow.
Will the AI of tomorrow simply be designed to optimize code? Or will the sheer pressure of these constraints force it to begin optimizing its own political and physical survival in a world that simply cannot keep up with it?
That is certainly something to think about the next time you hit enter on a prompt. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.